June 25th, 1876. Everyone knows Custer died at Little Bighorn, heroic last stand, wiped out to the last man. But that myth hides the real story. 700 cavalry and 35 scouts splintered by Custer's own orders, facing as many as 2,500 Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. Official doctrine said they should have won, if outnumbered 2-1. It wasn't enough. The Reno inquiry exposed confusion and gaps. Battlefield archaeology now shows a running collapse. Not a ring of defiance, but scattered positions overrun in minutes. So how did a plan that looked so solid on paper go so disastrously wrong? And why do so many get the numbers, alliances, and facts fatally wrong even today? The answer changes everything we think we know about Custer's last stand. On paper, the 7th Cavalry looked unstoppable. 700 troopers, 12 companies strong, led by a national celebrity. 35 Indian scouts, mostly Crow and Arikara, rode out front, their loyalty bought with old promises and new fears. But the numbers tell a different story than the legend. The truth is, Custer's regiment never faced a simple, outnumbered enemy. At Little Bighorn, the 7th Cavalry confronted a force that could have been 3 times their size. Estimates of Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors range from 1,100 to 2,500. The US Army's own doctrine insisted that regulars could prevail unless overwhelmed by at least 2-1. Custer's men faced far worse odds than the textbooks allowed. A week earlier at Rosebud Creek, Crazy Horse and his warriors had already driven back General Crook. That defeat left Custer's column exposed, alone, and cut off from any help to the south. The battlefield was not a stage for a single heroic last stand. It was a collision shaped by faulty assumptions and shifting alliances. Crow and Arikara scouts rode alongside the cavalry, fighting against other native nations. Evidence that the lines were never as simple as white versus native. The myth that every Ye one died at Little Bighorn ignores the reality. The regiment was split by Custer's orders, and only 5 companies, about 200 men, were wiped out. The rest, under Reno and Benteen, would soon find themselves fighting for their lives on the bluffs above the river. Custer's plan rested on a classic cavalry doctrine: divide, encircle, and strike before the enemy could scatter. He split the 7th Cavalry into 4 distinct elements, each with a precise role. Major Marcus Reno took 3 companies, A, G, and M, ordered to cross the river and launch a frontal attack against the village's southern edge. Captain Frederick Benteen, with H, D, and K companies, was sent on a wide swing to the left, tasked with blocking any breakout to the southwest and probing for hidden camps. Custer himself led 5 companies, C, E, F, I, and L, up the bluffs to the north, aiming to cut off escape and strike the village from a second direction. Captain McDougall's B Company trailed with the pack train carrying vital ammunition and supplies. On paper, the split looked methodical. The regiment's 12 companies moved as separate but coordinated blades, meant to close around the village like a trap. Orders were delivered in writing and by messenger. The 1879 Reno Court of Inquiry transcript preserves the language. Reno was to attack at once, Benteen to scout and block, and Custer to press from the north. Each officer received his instructions directly, with little room for improvisation. The doctrine assumed that native warriors would scatter at the first sign of a multi-pronged assault, just as previous army campaigns had taught. But the textbook confidence masked a deeper flaw. The numbers on the ground, nearly 3 native warriors for every cavalryman, did not match the assumptions behind the plan. As the companies fanned out, the regiment's strength was carved into isolated segments, each relying on the others to hold position and advance in unison. The fate of the 7th now depended on perfect timing, clear sight lines, and the hope that the enemy would break, not stand and fight. At noon on June 25th, Major Marcus Reno's battalion splashed across the Little Bighorn River, sabers left behind, carbines at the ready. The plan called for a swift attack on the southern end of the village, but what greeted them was not a scattering of teepees. Instead, Reno's men faced a sprawling encampment, thousands of Lakota and Cheyenne warriors already on the move. Within minutes, the charge slowed to a crawl. Under a storm of gunfire, Reno's companies veered into the timber, pinned down and bleeding men. Crow Scout Curley, riding with the column, later described the sudden panic, horses screaming, men shouting orders no one could hear, bullets cutting through brush and flesh alike. By 1:15 p.m., the situation was collapsing. Reno ordered a retreat, not a measured withdrawal, but a desperate dash across the open flats and up the bluffs. Some troopers made it on horseback, others ran on foot, chased by warriors on ponies. The timber became a killing ground. Survivors staggered up the slope, leaving behind the wounded and the dead. The retreat cost Reno nearly a quarter of his command in less than half an hour. On the heights, Reno's battered force tried to regroup. Captain Benteen, having scouted the left flank, arrived around 2 p.m. with 3 fresh companies. He brought a note from Custer. "Come on, big village, be quick, bring packs." But the ammunition train, slowed by rough ground and bulky mules, lagged far behind. The 7th's fate now hung on scattered companies, a delayed pack train, and the widening gap between Custer and the rest. Testimony from Curley and later army inquiries would confirm the confusion, the missed signals, and the brutal cost of a plan that fell apart in minutes. A wildfire swept across the Little Bighorn battlefield in 1983, stripping away decades of grass and brush. What the flames revealed changed everything. Archaeologists led by Richard Fox and National Park Service teams began the first systematic metal detection survey of the site. Over 5,000 artifacts, spent cartridges, bullets, uniform fragments, shattered equipment were logged and mapped to the square meter. The ground itself told a story no painting or legend could match. The scatter of cartridge cases did not form a neat circle. Instead, clusters stretched in broken lines from Calhoun Hill to Keogh's sector, then spilled downslope toward the deep ravine and up to Custer Hill. The evidence pointed to movement, lines collapsing, men falling back, pockets of resistance forming and dissolving under relentless attack. On Custer Ridge, cartridge concentrations thinned, suggesting desperate flight rather than organized defense. Some soldiers died in tight groups, others alone, their final positions marked by the glint of brass and lead. Native accounts, like those of Cheyenne warrior Yellow Nose, described the fighting as a running chase. Warriors on foot and horseback pressed the retreating cavalry, firing from repeating rifles and captured carbines. Archaeological ballistics matched the testimony. At least 371 different guns fired on the field, many of them rapid-fire Henrys and Spencers in native hands. The old image of single-shot army carbines holding a ring to the last man did not survive the evidence. Instead, the battle unfolded as a series of collapses, swift, chaotic, and mobile, with no time for a heroic stand. What the wildfire exposed, the data confirmed. Little Bighorn ended not in a circular last stand, but in a running fight. A shattered regiment scattered across the bluffs and coulees. Relief finally arrived on the morning of June 27th. General Terry and Colonel Gibbons' columns found Reno and Benteen survivors battered but alive, still dug in atop the bluffs. The cost was staggering. 268 members of the 7th Cavalry, scouts and civilians included, lay dead. Native losses were estimated between 60 and 100, a fraction by comparison. In the months that followed, pressure mounted for answers. The army convened a formal inquiry. Major Marcus Reno's conduct was placed under the microscope, with Captain Benteen called as a witness, but never charged. After weeks of testimony, the court delivered its verdict. Reno was acquitted of all blame. The official record declared he had acted as an officer should under impossible conditions. No criminal fault was found, and the War Department closed the matter. The question of who lost Custer would linger for generations. Libby Custer refused to let her husband's death fade into scandal or silence. For the next 25 years, she traveled from city to city, speaking before veterans groups and women's clubs, writing books and letters, and courting the press. Newspapers ran her stories of gallant sacrifice, and schoolbooks soon echoed her version. A doomed but glorious last stand, outnumbered and surrounded, Custer and his men fighting to the final bullet. The legend swept the country, drowning out questions about tactics or blame. Even as army transcripts and battlefield evidence told a messier story, the myth persisted, carried by a widow's pen and a nation eager for heroes. In the end, the gap between public memory and the facts on the ground became as wide as the river at Little Bighorn. Of the 700 soldiers and 35 Indian scouts who rode with the 7th Cavalry, 268 lost their lives at Little Bighorn, while most accounts estimate between 1,100 and 2,500 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors faced them. Archaeological surveys and native eyewitness testimony confirm the battle was not a static last stand, but a series of collapsing, chaotic retreats across the ridges. The 1879 Reno Court of Inquiry, based on sworn testimony, found no criminal fault, but preserved a record of confusion and split-second decisions. Yet, questions remain. The exact sequence of Custer's final moments is still debated, and some details were lost with the dead. Today, the site stands as evidence of flawed assumptions about native alliances, underestimated numbers, and tactical overreach. The story of Little Bighorn is not just legend, it is a case study in how myth often overshadows the historical record. The facts show a defeat shaped by miscalculation, resistance, and the lasting power of memory.